Welcome everyone. I'm Rupert Blackstone, Chair of the Energy, Environment and Sustainability Group Committee at the I Mech E, and I'm pleased to chair this Process Industries Division event, which has been organised by the Process Industries Division centres in the North West and Yorkshire regions and the Aberdeen area. And I'm honoured to introduce Allan Barton, who's going to give a talk on treasuring the planet's resources for the future. What should you do? Allan has worked in the resource and waste business for 35 years and has become increasingly passionate about sustainability, especially with regards to the planet's resources. For the past 15 years, he has worked for a global engineering consultancy. And I'm going to pass you over to Allan, and may I ask that if you've got questions, can you put them in the box on your screen as we go through the lecture, and we'll answer your questions at the end as far as we can. Or Allan will at least. So with this, pass on to Allan, and I'll look forward to hearing the presentation.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction. Hopefully you can all see the presentation. And my talk is the second in the series I've done. It's about sustainable resources and treasuring the planet's resources for the future. But in the first presentation, I asked a series of questions, whereas on this presentation, I'm going to talk about what you can actually do. And this is a picture of Earth. Obviously, it was taken on Apollo 8, and it's the first time we really saw our home being a small planet in a massive universe. And your home needs your help. If you say, how did we get to today's society? Well, we went for millions of years as hunter-gatherers. Then we had an agricultural revolution where we saw we could grow crops. And with that came an increase in population and societies formed. The next major big event was the Industrial Revolution, when we discovered we could earn our livings through mass production of goods. And one of the big events is certainly, but after the First World War and during the Second World War or after them, population grew significantly, as did our ability to manufacture stuff. And equally, our innovation has rocketed, really. As you think, we've gone from a steam engine to putting a man on the moon and cars that drive themselves in the space of 200 years. And in my lifetime, when I was 10, we had watches that you wound up, and we did complex calculations with a slide rule. Whereas today I've got a watch that, well, not only tells me the time, it's a phone, and even tells me if I had a heart attack. And we've got pretty powerful computers and cars that do drive themselves. But you say, well, what's the need? What are we worrying about? What's the need for action? Well, the first sort of almost the elephant in the room, really, that we don't tend to talk about too much is population growth. And population growth, if it continues on this high projection, we're going to use, well, we're going to need another planet, basically. And the other thing we've done is we've produced a lot of carbon dioxide. And you can obviously see here, there's a direct correlation between climate change and carbon dioxide. We've equally destroyed the wildness of the world. This is Europe. And if we look at the rest of the world, we've impacted everywhere, apart from the green areas on this slide, which are either very cold or a desert or very difficult to get to. And we've impacted on the oceans. If you look at the way we plunder the oceans for fish, we've done pretty well at that. And there's this concept called planetary boundaries, where the planet can survive within the circle, within the green, and you'll see that we've gone outside the green on a number of areas. We've also taken the planet's resources, the minerals that we mine and the other things that we grow, and we're using them at an increasing rate. And the red line on here is an estimate as to what our planet can sustain. And if you look at it, the world at the present moment generates somewhere in the region of 2 billion tons of municipal waste a year, and 33% of that, at least 33% of that, is not managed in an environmentally safe manner. And if you look around the world, depends how you group the world together, but we're producing waste around the world. And some nations, as you can see, North America, produce more waste per capita than others. And if all the world wants to live like they do in the American dream, we've got a problem. What harm have we done? Well, we've obviously increased temperature. It now rains in Antarctica, and this is an Adelie penguin, and he's about to die because his little down coat doesn't protect him from the rain and the cold. And you'll all be aware that we've plundered the rainforests to grow crops, and we seem to think that the ocean is a pretty good dustbin for us. And if we're not careful, we could end up like the folks on Easter Island. And when Captain Cook arrived there, he found a small, lean and timid and miserable population who were subsistence farmers. But it was obvious that at one stage they had a very vibrant society because they chopped down trees to wheel these statues around and make them and put them up. Unfortunately, they chopped down all the trees. And you can imagine the transition from a very vibrant society to a bunch of miserable people. And I bet the leaders were the people that left on the last canoes and sailed off towards the sunrise. So we must start balancing the natural world, or possibly there is a view that we could face a sixth extinction. So what must we focus on? Well, we should focus on sustainability and all things that support life on our planet, and I mean all life. And I believe we've got 6 areas with regard to sustainable resources that we need to focus on. First one is obviously carbon, and we need to get our energy from the sun, obviously solar and wind, and we can grow crops and with things to burn to make energy. And it's my view, if the energy source is in the ground, we should leave it there. And if we are going to set ourselves a target to reduce carbon, we should do it, and we should make this transition to renewables as quickly as possible. We can also get energy from the gravity in the form of the moon affecting the tides, and this is a tidal mill in Hampshire. And obviously the differential head of water can be used for energy. And we need to rebalance the natural world. We've got to stop chopping down rainforests and continuing to destroy the wilderness. And if anything, we've got to try and get it back again. And we've got to stop plundering the oceans as much as we do. And we've definitely got to stop just putting our rubbish into the sea. And I mentioned planetary boundaries. If you look at these, if we go outside, we've got a problem. And one of the big areas of problem is agriculture. Obviously, the biochemicals, fertilizers, and the diversity loss is there equal. We've changed the land towards growing crops. So that's one of the biggest factors we've got. We've also gone outside in novel entities, and that's the chemicals that we make, the toxic waste, the plastics, and the things that we actually manufacture. And we're going outside on green water, and green water is the moisture in the ground that helps us grow things. Obviously, more of our land is ending up as a desert. The next area we ought to focus on is the United Nations Sustainability Goals, and there are a number of these which directly relate to resources. And obviously, as I've said, we've got to focus on sustainable agriculture, and obviously we've got to have sustainable modern form of energy, and we've got to have sustainable economic growth, because as the population grows, we do need more money to sustain that. And we've got to look at how we make our industrialization sustainable. Equally, how we live. More people now live in cities. And the picture I've just put up is in Singapore at Marina Bay Sands, and we've actually built these structures and we're encouraging the wildlife back into the city. And if you ever go to Singapore, I do recommend you go and look at it. We also need to have sustainable consumption and production. And we obviously need to combat climate change, and equally sustainable use of our oceans, and sustainably manage our forests and ecosystems. The next area, I think, is the circular economy we need to focus on. And if this report is right, we're actually going backwards. Now, since the Industrial Revolution and before, we've been taking materials, we've been making them into something, and then we've just disposing of them either into landfill or into an energy from waste plant. And that has to stop. And the circular economy is basically, we just go with the resources we've got, we go round and round and round. And I split this into two categories. One is the organic resources that we have. And that cycle has been going on for millions of years. It actually gave us the oxygen that we breathe. And it's been in balance. We just need to, anything organic, we need to go back to that cycle. And the other area is anything inorganic, the things we mine, the materials that we use. We need to have a similar cycle on there. And if we can't recycle them anymore at the moment, we should put them somewhere safe. And obviously we need to recycle, and that's best done with separate collection so that it's clean. But we must ensure that there's a use for the recycling. It's pointless recycling or trying to collect things and then not having a use for them. And we need to take our part in separating the complex goods. And this can be done either chemically with acid, where you can get the gold out of mobile phones, or thermally. And we can do it mechanically with obviously ourselves or with the help of robots. And we can do it biologically. There's certain enzymes that help us break things down. But the sixth area I think we need to focus on is treasuring the planet's resources for the future. And some examples of where we don't do that at the present moment. Phosphorus is an example. We mine it out of the ground, we put it, use it as a fertilizer on the ground, and some of it washes down into the rivers and oceans. And even the bit that goes into us, certainly in the UK, our sewage sludge gets spread to land, and again, it's going to end up in oceans and rivers. And some of the chemicals, and certainly plastic into the oceans, is an example of where we haven't treasured the resources. And we put things into landfill. Now, if we put organic material into landfill, the bacteria eat it and produce methane. But equally, they're quite acidic. So any minerals we put in there are probably going to end up as in some form of salt over time. And that salt will end up in the leachate, and the leachate ends up eventually in oceans. And we shouldn't really put the inorganic fraction of residual waste. That's the waste that you put in your black bin or your black wheelie bin or your black bag. But until we've actually got a fully circular economy, putting it into a waste to energy plant is a good idea. And the problem with putting things like mobile phones into a waste to energy plant is, well, certainly the indium in the gold that's in there will stay in the bottom ash. And that bottom ash currently, majority of it, vast majority of it, ends up as aggregate. So we've lost those materials then. If they don't go in, if the mineral doesn't go into the bottom ash, it goes into the flue gas cleaning, and it'll end up in the fly ash collection system, and that'll end up in oceans eventually. And I just asked the question: did we really treasure by simply burning the fossil fuels that we've been using? Surely there's a better use for them. So I think we need this sort of research, and we need to design some form of repository, a bit like we do with nuclear waste, so that we could save these precious materials that we can't separate at this present moment. Other things we must do, well, that word simply needs to disappear, and we need to regard everything as a resource. We need to break the linkage between GDP and resource use. Obviously, it goes up with population, but equally, it goes up with GDP. We need to find a global solution, because things are probably dreamed up in North America or Europe, manufactured in Asia, and then get distributed around the world. And if you say where do mobile phones end up, either they're recycled or they end up probably in developing nations, and then questionable where they do end up in the end. But we need to consider all resources through all facets of human activity. Obviously, the organic things listed there, and the inorganic things, particularly the built environment and manufactured goods, and the other sectors that we work in. Obviously, energy, water, and air as well. And we need to look at and treasure these critical materials, because they are going to get scarce. And here's a good example, brilliant piece of work by the Royal Society of Chemistry. And 6 of the elements found in a mobile phone are set to run out in the next 100 years. And indium, which is the touchscreen, gives us the touchscreen capability, is going to run out in 20 years. But we need to think about considering resources, all resources, through all cycles of their use and future use. We equally need our scientists and engineers to get together and to consider the complexity and give good advice to society. And I think, if you look at this slide, it basically shows the sort of things that are involved in this conversation. And we need to sort through this complexity towards some clear base goals based on science and engineering. We equally need the developing nations to share best practice with the developing nations. And I think the areas of green here are the nations that are doing most with the resources we don't use, and certainly Western Europe, because it's had most legislation for the longest period. And we've now got an integration of various approaches that we use. We build energy from waste plants. Yes, it can be a ski slope, but equally it provides energy in the form of heat and power to the local community. It's based on this sort of great technology. And as you can see, there is an enormous flue gas cleaning plant on the right-hand side of this, because the emissions, allowable wet emissions out of an incineration or combustion plant these days are certainly for this material, some of the tightest in the world. And we build mechanical biological treatment plants where we treat the waste in some form biology, and then we can refine out of it some of the materials and reuse them. And we build anaerobic digestion plants where we can make energy and equally make fertilizer with the organic material. And we're moving down the route of co-mingled dry recyclates, and they obviously need to be separated. And if you look at Western Europe, certainly the 10 nations that have moved furthest away from landfill is done with a combination of those, of biological, recycling, combustion and landfill. And I think we've got these 6 R's, obviously reuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, refine, and by refine, trying to use, get as much out of the residual fraction as we can. And if we can't get anything, we obviously put it into an energy from waste plant. But equally, we need some form of repository for the materials we can't separate. As far as the developing nations, the red and the amber is starting to move in the right direction. They need help. We've got to realise there's a direct correlation between Maslow's triangle and the sort of resource hierarchy. Because if haven't got any food, or someone's shooting at you, you're not going to be worried about recycling. And the first step really is to make sure it's collected. In some areas, waste is not collected, and it probably ends up in an open dump or just thrown in the bush. But it would be better to put it in a landfill, and even better to put it into an engineered landfill where you can grab the methane and turn it into electricity. And everybody aspires to move towards this combination of the integrated solution, but everybody needs to realise that developing nations are going to struggle to fund that at this present moment. And we got to realise that equally, a lot of people in the developing nations earn their living from recycling. And this is a picture of a landfill site in Mexico. So it still goes on there. And we've got to build some of the infrastructure to help us handle these resources we don't use anymore, or we finish with. And here's an example of sewage sludge incinerator. And in Germany now, they're actually putting the ability to capture the phosphorus on the back end of their sewage sludge incinerators. And obviously, in off-peak times, you can use the energy from the spare energy from a waste to energy facility, energy from waste facility, to produce hydrogen. And here's an example of thermal treatment of the complex materials. This is the bottom ash in a plant in Switzerland, where they're actually taking the bottom ash as an ore and they're refining it, and it pays for itself from the gold and the silver and the other precious metals that are in the waste. And 50% of the energy in a energy from waste plant comes probably from renewable sources, but the remainder is fossil, and obviously capturing the carbon on the back end of there is being looked at more. Here's a small anaerobic digestion plant, containerized, can be put on the back of a supermarket or in a hospital or a university. And there's been this goal in the UK for many years to generate pyrolysis, and our 2 new aircraft carriers actually have pyrolysis units on them. Be good to see how they get on. But one of the big areas is obviously burning biomass, because A, we can grow it, and B, the wood we no longer use can be combusted as well to make energy. And we are getting further down the route of making something useful out of our resources, such as fuel for airplanes. But what we really do need is a behavioural change programme and a sense of urgency. And we need it now, because we don't need it when it's too late. And we need people to change and change their behaviours. And I'm encouraged by the young, because the young seem to be incredibly passionate about our planet, and it's going to do us good for the future. So I then get to the point, well, come on then, what should you do? What should I do? And I developed this. I sort of thought, well, how do I impact on the planet? And obviously I travel, and I need to consider the mode of travel and the energy I use in doing that. And yes, our newest car is an electric one. And certainly COVID taught me to walk more. And energy in my home, how do I get the heat? And how do I provide the heat and power? And how do I minimise the heat loss and minimise the usage? And I obviously eat and drink, and I started to move towards having vegetarian meals now and again, because it's growing crops to feed animals, and eating the animals is not the most sustainable thing. And equally, starting to consider, well, where do we buy our food from? Is it locally? Is it seasonal? Do we really need to get exotic materials traveling all around the world so we can eat them? And then I asked myself the question, well, where's the source of this? Am I actually taking oil that's been grown where they've chopped the rainforest down to grow it? And I'm asking myself the question, am I eating more organic materials as opposed to, you've seen the impact of fertilizers? Well, let's move towards organic. And what do I do with the unused food? Well, obviously you can compost it, or you can send it to anaerobic digestion. And the clothes I wear, ask yourself the question, well, what are they made of? Is it organic? Is it made of cotton? Is it made of bamboo? Is it made of man-made fibers? Because it's the man-made fibers that, when you put them in the washing machine, microfibers come off, and guess where they end up? In the oceans. And even consider, certainly when you finish with clothes, put them into the recycling process. And if I look at the machinery in my home, well, I ask myself the question, what is life? How long will it last? Is it repairable? We seem to have moved away from repairing things over the last 50 years. And how often am I going to upgrade it? How often do you actually need to replace your television? And then ask myself the question, is it sustainable? Can it be dismantled? Is it recyclable? Where does it end up to at the end of its life? And the infrastructure I use, certainly if there's anything being put forward locally to help us achieve this sustainability and certainly getting our energy from the sun, we should encourage it. And equally, like the machines in our home, the goods in our home, what's its life? Is it repairable? How often do I need to replace my phone? Is it every time Apple bring one out, or whoever your supplier is? And how is it designed and dismantled? And equally, ask yourself the question, do you really need it? And Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is a habit, not an act. We need to get this thought process into society so it becomes a habit. Other things you can do, well, you can work on your circle of influence, the people you know, and try and persuade them to do and be aware. Hey, voting for politicians who are genuinely delivering on a sustainable future would be a good idea. And if there's any Americans, please don't vote for Donald again. We can buy things from corporates that genuinely practice sustainability in all they do. And we can play our part in the circular economy yes, we recycle, but equally take your complex materials to the reuse and recycling centres where they can be put into the process. We need to reduce our residual fraction. UK government have said they want to reduce it by 50% by the year 2042. And the residual fraction is your stuff you put in the black bin or your black bag. It becomes contaminated and it's very difficult to separate it. Yes, you can get the iron out, but the rest is very difficult. And obviously, if you've got a garden, composting is a very good idea. And support sustainable initiatives. If you are going to go and visit a rainforest, make sure you do it with a company that's actually supporting the rainforest and the people that live there. And if you can get the chance of buying food from a wild farm, it would be a good idea. And equally, you can support some of the initiatives like Earthshot and other things that are going on. And if you look at the Earthshot, these 5 people won £1 million in 2021. And activities included helping protect the rainforest, eliminating crop burning, growing coral on land so you can replenish the oceans, and a food waste hub in Milan, and a small hydrogen generator that can be used for a house. And in 2022, the prize winners were a gentleman that's got a greenhouse in a box, and it's aimed at small holdings, certainly in Africa and other developing nations, a large number of small holdings, and it gives them a greenhouse that they can erect quite cheaply. Equally, a small biomass stove to replace the ones that pollute and cause health impacts. And a group of indigenous ladies are helping protect the Great Barrier Reef. And this gentleman is producing plastics from seaweed. And the last gentleman is found a way of injecting carbon dioxide in solution into a certain type of rock where he lives. But we need to minimize our use of resources, and that includes buying stuff. Now, what must you do at work? And it obviously depends what your job is. But working for a corporate is truly sustainable would be a great idea. And if you are in a one that's not at the present moment, trying to encourage them to change and prevent this sort of greenwashing that goes on. But possibly we're involved in the design of things, and we need to design resources in mind. And what resources are going to be used over the life of it? What's its carbon footprint over its life? What's its impact on the natural world footprint over its life? How effective is it and how efficient is it? Is it repairable and upgradable? All on the basis of treasuring the resources for future generations. And if you're looking at it, at designing, well, where are the resources going to go in the future? Can it be reused? Can it be dismantled? Can it be recovered? Again, on the basis of treasuring the planet's resources for the future. And my view is we need more daisies. And this is Daisy. I walked into the Apple shop and I said, oh, I'll buy a new Apple phone. What will you do with the old one? The assistant said, oh, you need to watch Daisy. And Daisy separates these things and helps recycle mobile phones. And if you look at how clever we are at mass production of goods, we need more mass production. Dismantling. We equally need to consider unforeseen risks and consequences. Wouldn't it be good if the guys that started using the Industrial Revolution started realizing that maybe asking the question, what are we going to do to the atmosphere if we burn all this coal? This guy, probably best if he'd been a finance director, because he invented unleaded petrol and CFCs and has probably caused more environmental damage than any other person in mankind's history. Did we really consider when we made clothes out of man-made fibres that the fibres could end up in the oceans? And we're rushing down the use of batteries, and considering the life cycle of lithium would be a good idea. But equally, corporates have a great ability to influence. They can influence their supply chain. They can even influence their customers. So they can equally have a greater impact on governments and getting things done. And if I had 4 wishes, what would I wish for? Well, I'd certainly wish for the current breed of politicians that go to the COP conferences to take real action, and take real action now, not just talk about it or make promises for the future. And I would remove all the barriers that are stopping us. If you look at how we respond sometimes, certainly how America responded after Pearl Harbor, it made an enormous number of aircraft carriers incredibly quickly. So we can do things if we break the barriers down and we get everybody working in the same direction. And I'd bridge across the silos that we have. If you look at government, we've got ministries that look at particular things, and some of this bridges across various ministries. And equally, you can argue the same, it's in the I Mech E. But most of all, I would get everyone to consider sustainability in all things, not just sit there, do something. And if you say, what have I done? Well, I'm involved with setting up this sort of sustainable resources working group in the I Mech E. Our concept is treasuring the planet's resources for the future and preserving our planet for the future generations by inspiring our talented engineering community to create the social change we need. We're looking obviously at the 6 areas I mentioned, but equally these 3. And our objectives to start with are having conversations in the I Mech E, and then set up some form of think tank forum to get scientists and engineers to start thinking about a path through the complexity, obviously engage with the membership, and equally develop some internal communications strategy to create the social change we need. Our next presentation is on re-engineering for sustainability, and looking at the full product life and beyond to achieve sustainability. Thank you for listening. Please get in touch if you want to help. My email address is there, and I'm now going to...
Thank you very much, Alan. That was a very engaging and thought-provoking presentation covering many different areas. I'll put the questions to you that have been...
Please do.
Got one from Stan Rutter of IMechE. Can you see a future where heavy industry and manufacturing is relocated to space or other planets?
In the short term, no. but if you consider one day the sun will go out, we do need to develop the ability to maybe move. But no, I don't see it. Not in the short term. No. Well, yeah, not for a very long time. Because, well, why? We've got to learn how to live on this planet with the resources we've got, haven't we?
Sure. Well, thanks, Alan. There's a question here from Dominic Gerati, who's a design engineer at Rolls-Royce. Does the I Mech E have genuine engagement with politicians and governments on this subject?
We've got a new policy director, and I've got a meeting with him hopefully soon. And our chief executive is very keen on sustainability. We do, I believe, have some influence, but in this particular field, I think we need to refocus what we're doing and make sure that we do end up with a joined up approach to things. Yes, we can lobby in certain parts of it, but we need a joined up strategy, don't we? But we do need to lobby our government. Since Brexit, environmentally, we've gone backwards. Because if you look at Europe, they've got incredible. They've got 35 actions they're doing to help generate a circular economy, including legislation. And I just question what the UK is going to do.
Thank you, Alan. We've got a compliment from Catriona Baker here, from who's a sustainability chemist at Ecolab, which I think I should share with you. Very interesting and enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Ashley Kingston, business owner, AMK Business Consulting, has a question. What do you think can be done to refocus efforts in hard times, such as now, with the war in Europe and cost of living. For most politicians, climate is a low priority.
Yeah, as I said, in sort of people obviously focus on what's really important to them at the time, and not being shot and having food to eat is very important. But we can't lose sight. We've still got quite a vibrant economy, or certainly Europe has, and we can't lose sight of these goals. And if you look at it, the fuel crisis generated by the Ukraine war was an ideal opportunity where we could have and should have continue to accelerate this transition to renewable energy.
Thanks, Alan. Can I encourage people to keep putting their questions in the box while we're waiting for more to come through? I've got a question, Alan. When you presented well the waste hierarchy there and how we should avoid waste in the first place, and then recycle and where that's not the best environmental option or practical as energy from waste and so forth. But from a consumer perspective, when we think of waste as being a product of the cumulative impact of people's lifestyles, and you talked about how we as individuals have choices. How do you communicate to people the relative impact of recycling versus waste avoidance? Because I think a lot of people and businesses think that they're doing their bit by recycling, and they don't have to worry about the impact of recycling, even though it has got an impact. But it's the scale that's important, isn't it? I mean, it's the same way people think they're going to solve the energy crisis by unplugging their phone chargers. Sometimes, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's relative, isn't it? And how do we communicate the scale of the problem and how does that affect the decisions people make?
Right. I think it's how do you change society? You can only nudge society, I think, but you need more people that understand to actually communicate and share what needs to be done with people, and give them good examples so they can understand it. People need to be told, a bit like this presentation is a bit of a story. You need to tell a story and explain to them what's happening. If you see that program with that Adelie penguin on it, it's heartbreaking in a way to see the planet, the impact we're having on the planet, and we just need to communicate it well with as many people as we can. And the young are doing pretty good at that, aren't they? But we need to be rational and sensible in the way that we communicate with people. But we need to give them the facts. We need to give them good advice so that they can make their decisions.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, because it's such a complex situation. You're talking about an area of sustainability, and there's so many decisions people have to make with their food and their travel and their waste, and it's very hard to know the relative impact of everything. Right. Do you think there's a way? Do you think we should be communicating by giving people data on relative impact? Is that realistic? Should it be done? I think,
you've got to do it in a language people are going to understand, haven't you? Yes, making choices based on the facts. And one of the bits in Europe, isn't it, is that they're actually going to put more effort into explaining on the goods you buy what their impact is and how much they do damage how much energy they use, etc. So that's informing people, but equally it needs one incredible behavioural change program at the same time so that people understand it and they actually make decisions based on it.
Sure. I picked up thanks, Alan, for that. I picked up a related question here from Rory Fisher, who's a senior design engineer with Dyson. Do you know of a good way to try and track your environmental impact into the sectors you described in your presentation?
There is an app, and I think it's done by it's a UN app where you can actually calculate your carbon footprint. And it's that sort of thing that we need to develop more, isn't it? So that people can simply say, oh, on this app, you can put in some of the things and it'll help you make that, give you sort of that information. There you go. You've just thought of a great idea for putting into an Earthshot prize for £1 million to help develop a simple app that helps you understand the impact on the carbon footprint and natural world footprint of what you're doing.
Great. That's
there you go. There's a bit
idea,
Alan. There goes an idea.
Over to you, Rory, with that one.
Over you. Well, no. I think and one thing that strikes me whenever I talk to people, and even some of our conversations, Rory, when you talk to people about things, you do get more information, and your decisions are based on better information. You obviously make better decisions.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. There's a question here from Prithif John, who's a technical engineer with ABB. How do you push for more sustainable practices at work if you don't have decision-making power? And he added a very comprehensive presentation.
Yeah. Well, it helps if you're in an organisation like Arup, which is owned by the employees. And I've actually known some of a graduate one time giving the UK chairman a really hard time. If there's a culture where you can actually ask questions, it helps. But if there's not that culture, you can still ask questions. You obviously need to do it tactfully. But at the end of the day, a business is its employees. And if enough of them say, hey guys, we shouldn't be doing this. And certainly Arup's made some decisions that it's going to back out of various fields. Yeah, I think you just need to be prepared to stand up and ask the questions.
Thanks, Alan. There's a suggestion here from Daphne Wasserman, who's retired and active member of ESG. With regard to the current political problems, expenditure could be targeted to green job creation, such as home energy improvements and building more green homes. What do you think of that, Alan?
I think during difficult times, focusing the money that the spare money, well, not spare money, but government's money in moving this forward quickly and moving it forward effectively, it's going to be good. And you went through that. I went through that slide of all the things where I impact on the planet, and governments helping to attack those has got to be the right thing to do.
Yeah, thank you. The question from Martin Gee, who's a director. How is the IMechE supporting the various priorities around the world?
Cool. Well, we do have a global membership, which must obviously have influence around the world. I'd have to default to you for that question, Rupert.
Yeah, I think there's an increasing interest in engaging globally. UK is still quite very UK centred, but there are, as you say, there's a global membership in regional groups, and it's work in progress, I'd say.
I think if you look at it, I know the chief executive and the president went to COP27. I'm not sure if anybody from the IMechE goes to Davos, but there are ways of influencing globally. I'm not quite sure how much work we do with the United Nations.
There are occasionally
not a good idea.
And well, there's the work done in relation to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through future engineering solutions grouping of which is pan-institutional. IMechE has been an integral part of that, so that's something we've been doing. And then there are occasional events or initiatives which receive funding. I went on one myself a few years ago with Ian Narman and Rod Smith, who was president at the time, to Japan to discuss with the Japan Society of Mechanical Engineers energy after the great earthquake, and so there are initiatives like that. But I think it's recognised, and we've had feedback from the membership recently that more needs to be done. So it is something that is recognised as being important and being developed. Then John Duffel is lead mechanical engineer at GE. Should we pay for the end-of-life disposal of the goods we use at the point of purchase? If so, any thoughts on how we could implement this?
Should we pay for it? When we buy something, should we pay for its whole life, including its dismantling and saving the resources? I believe yes, we should. And that puts an obligation on the producers of things to and the supply chain to facilitate that. If you look at it, there are a series of incentives or taxes from government are probably the easiest way of doing that. Because of what we do at the present moment with the materials we don't want, it's the local authority that do that, and we fund it through our council tax. So yeah, it should be the producer should pay. We obviously fund the producers, so yeah, there's got to be some way of doing it.
Good idea.
Through government. So yeah, it's yeah, should be done through some form of tax, I think, so that government can then fund it and help establish the facilities to do things.
Yeah, thank you. It's a question from Ted Cooper, who's retired. For an individual person, do you have any specific suggestions for changing day-by-day activities to generate some improvements?
Well, I think the first step is realising that you do have an impact, and sit down and think about, as I did, well, how do I have an impact on the natural world? And start asking yourself questions, and then work out what you can do, and make small steps, and just do more of them. So yeah, I think sit down, work out where you have an impact, as I did, and ask yourself the question, what can you do, and take small steps towards it. We're not saying everybody needs to become a monk and just a vegetarian monk and either way, but be sensible. If you've got alternatives and you can afford them, maybe err on the side of, as an example, buying organic food, as opposed to stuff grown with fertilizers. So small steps at a time, but the biggest step is realizing you should do something.
Thanks, Alan. Question from Alan Jennings. To go from a linear flow of resources to a circular flow will need significant investment. What are the driving forces that will trigger the required investments?
Right. Well, influencing the corporates to do that, making it clear to the corporates that in your decision-making process, if you're going to buy something, and asking the questions, how sustainable is it? And if it's not sustainable, maybe you find one that is and buy that. And corporates will very quickly change and become sustainable if they stop selling things. So again, it's influence the people to ask those questions of the things they buy. How sustainable is this produced?
Thank you. Question from Sam Coleman, who's the product assurance leader at Garrett Motion. What do you think is the best approach to overcoming understandable political resistance from countries/governments which are trying to improve the quality of life of their population who are living in poverty and would like them to have the same luxuries, such as the latest TVs, mobile phones, as we have in OECD countries? Without their buy-in, the sixth extinction event looks increasingly likely.
And I think that's where I think the UN sustainability goals are so good, because they are all encompassing, and we do need to increase the sort of productivity and the GDP of these developing nations, and getting it so that they can afford to make these decisions. When you've got an economy and you've got people starving, it's very difficult to do that. But we need to strengthen their economies so they can start allocating those funders, and we need to help them in that process. And I think that's where helping those developing nations, because I'm fortunate in the past 15 years I've traveled the world talking to people about this topic, and everywhere I've been, every nation has been keen to do something. And it's always comes up with, the funding it is difficult in the developing nations, and having the cultures that support some of the technologies that are required. So it is. Everybody wants to try and do something, and we need to help them. Well, that's why I think that sharing this best practice is so important.
Thank you. This is a comment from Peter Flynn, who's a past president at I Mech E.
Hi, Peter.
We have a small number, that's 4, of key themes for the external impact of the institution, including education and future transport. In your interactions with James Partington, I would suggest that you advocate circular economy as one of our key themes.
Yeah. I was encouraged. I met with our chief executive, Alice, and we were talking on the same language. She's keen on sustainability and actually getting that. And I see it's now. Well, we need to raise the profile of this, and we need to get it as a core theme. Because we are the engineers, and why government haven't got a chief engineering officer, I'm not quite sure. But we do need to get engineers and scientists to actually talk together, because the scientists have got the really clever ideas, and it's the engineers that turn them into reality. Well, the scientists have got the real knowledge of these things, and us engineers can actually turn them into reality. So, yeah, we need that to happen as well.
Thank you also, Peter. There's a question from Colin Warburton, who's retired. Your app solution implies continuous waste re-phones. I'm a retired engineer. I have a 20-year-old phone and have never had an app. Am I sustainable? I suppose the issue there is whether you get a phone especially to have the app, or whether you're considering the marginal impact of adding an app to a phone you already have. So I think what Colin is saying would be that he would have to get a phone to use the app, and so this general use of apps can lead to wastage.
I think my answer to that, Colin, is if you look at society today, certainly the young, they all have mobile phones. They all use them tremendous amount. The way of influencing them and getting involved in them is through that medium, embracing it and using it, I think, is a way of actually communicating en masse with a lot of people.
Well, and I mean, the app could tell you the impact of changing your mobile phone, so you can hang on to the phone, and
I think the point on that is, if you look at it at the moment, the phone companies bring out a new phone every year, and if you just actually skipped a generation of phone and did it every 2 years, you'd have the amount of indium that's being used. If you did it every 3 or 4 years, you'd do that, and you just ask yourself the question: what is the change between Rev 15 and 16 or whatever it is now? Do I really need that? Question mark.
I mean, and there's a company, Fairphone, who they're replacing the different components, don't they? And how do you see I mean, you put a video of Apple there, which has been accused in the past of inbuilt obsolescence in their phones, and the model being to get people to change their phones. They're not the only ones. arguably. But do you see companies like Apple, other phone companies, looking to thinking more about circular economy and replacing components and making them last?
Well, there is. Forgive me, I don't know the name of it, but there is a phone already that does that, where you just buy the standard phone and you can.
I think that's Fairphone.
Yeah. More of those for those would be a good idea. There's various options in there. I think my point is, at the end of the day, you want to be able to treasure the resources that we're not using anymore. So taking them apart, not using as much, it's all part of a mix, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. Quick question here from Martin Suter, metallurgist, materials engineer at M. Suter UK Limited. Thank you. You mentioned microfiber pollution into our rivers and seas. We know the extent of microbead pollution, and we can find this on our beaches now. Is there a quantitative measure for microfibers?
I did a piece of work with the Nature Conservancy, which is a not-for-profit organisation in America, but it's now global, and their goal is to protect rivers, sea, and coastal areas, and they wanted to understand ocean plastics. We did a 4-day workshop with them where we talked about it, and it's horrendous when you consider the quantity of plastic, and there are some numbers about the amount of ocean plastic, but when you look at those maps of, and I put one up, of where through sampling the ocean we've discovered micro-sized plastic particles in the ocean, it's horrendous. It really is. And yes, we got these big collections of waste, certainly in the Pacific and things, where you can get that out. But to me, it's the microfibers that really worry me, because one thing that persistent toxic chemicals like is to attach to microfibers, and these microfibers get into fish and they get into the food chain, and they're going to end up getting into us, which it's just something we've got to do. And I know Europe, one of their activities is to put legislation in with regard to the production of microfibers from textiles, which is, to me, entirely sensible, that you've got to legislate.
Yeah. Well, we've got 2 or 3 more questions. We'll see how you go with the next one, because we're going to have to wrap up soon. But we've got one here from Gareth Evans, Head of Rail Technology at Network Rail. Thank you for a great presentation, Alan. How reliable is the data on the environmental impact of some of the decisions we make in our professional and personal lives to make sure we make good decisions? Are there organisations that check the data against agreed standards?
Increasingly, if you look at this ES, environmental, social and governance goals, there are moves to make that more uniform and actually measure things. I think there are moves afoot to do that through the ESG approach, but it does need to have good data, doesn't it? But it does need to be done by unbiased people.
Sure. I think we'll have time for just one very quick question. And that is, in the process of Lydia MacLeod, University of Utrecht master's student, in the process of decarbonising the economy, how big is the risk that emissions impacts are simply being displaced further away from point of use? If the goal is only to decarbonise, reduce waste to landfill in your own country, how do we ensure responsibility for the whole life cycle, even when emission disposal is likely to happen in another country economic system? How to avoid increased poverty and life quality gap, especially in countries in the global south? Very quickly, if you don't mind, please, Alan, because we're...
Okay, we need to take a global view of these things. There's no point just sending your production to China or to India, whatever, and still producing the same amount of carbon. It needs to be looked at globally, and all nations need to take part in achieving a reduction. So yeah, it does need to be a global system.
Thank you, Allan. Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much for both the excellent presentation, the excellent way in which you've answered all those questions, which are very wide ranging, and thank you very much to the audience for the good questions. Please note there, if you'd like a CPD certificate, please email Murat Islam. You can see his email address on the screen there. And please give your feedback to the Process Industries Division via the link also there on the screen. So with that, I'll close the event, and many thanks again to Allan for the excellent.
Thank you for attending, guys.